Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue my discussion on the clans and bloodlines of vampires in Vampire the Masquerade. We finished up with the Camarillo's main clans last time. Today we begin with the Sabbat, with the leaders of the Sabbat, the Lasombra, elegant, inhuman predators. They are masters of the disciplines of obtenebration, dominate, and potence. They believe in this philosophy that the worthy should rule over the unworthy. They use the Sabbat to accomplish many of their tasks. Thanks to their weakness, they have no reflection. This also means they cannot be photographed, and they don't show up on security cameras. Strangely enough, their clothes and the items that they carry also do not show up on these security cameras. But their connection to darkness, to the shadows, also means that they take one extra level of damage when exposed to sunlight. Now, the Sombra were founded by, of course, the antediluvian Lasombra. Lasombra is said to have been one of the older antediluvians, but regardless, was also there during the time where the antediluvians rebelled against the second generation. When Cain came and cursed them all, it is said that Ventru blamed Lasombra being the ringleader of all of this. And that is why Lasombra were not put in charge of the antediluvians. They lost their place, basically ruling over all of vampires because of the Ventru. Whether this is true or not, it's just a story. Now, it is said that Lasombra himself, the antediluvian, traveled to Sicily during this time. The Lasombra have his connection with the sea, which none can quite explain. And of course, the antediluvian has just the same. Perhaps it's something to do with the flood, and that there was a fascination involved with it. From Sicily, he effectively ruled for some time, until volcanic activity there drove many of them to become more nomadic. They became pirates, and pirated upon Greek and Roman areas, among the empires of the time. Now, when Rome was finally settled, Lasombra did move in there and become part of the rulership, next to the Ventru and the Malkavians. Eventually, of course, the Ventru left. They headed north. The Sombra stayed in Rome. Now, in the Dark Ages, the Sombra remained control, effectively, of much of the Mediterranean. It became known as the Sea of Shadows under their control, and they were known as one of the high clans. During this time, they became heavily associated with religion. Both the Catholic Church and Islam became tenets of certain members of the clan. Unfortunately, this did lead to some conflicts within Spain and their own sort of inquisition that matched the one that was going on within Spain, matched in the vampire society. So the Sombra solidified their connections to both church and nobility. Now, when the Anarch Revolt occurred, Lasombra himself was struck down, at least his physical form. It is said that his mind still exists within the abyss, the shadow realm that Lasombra carry their obtenebration powers from. He was struck down by his youngest child, Granito de Vernose, with the help of Assamite. He struck down many of the elders, and then he took many of the remaining Lasombra under his wing. Effectively, they flocked to him. Many of them were displeased with the idea of the Convention of Thorns, the effective agreement settling the Camarilla, because it was, of course, originated from the Ventru, their hated enemies. In the early Renaissance, the Sombra effectively became the leaders of the Sabbat during this time. They found their place as leadership of this fledgling group. But unfortunately, their political power began to wane during this time. So they began to use some more brutal tactics and actually piracy in order to maintain control. The piracy they used to strike back against their hated enemies, the Camarilla. And of course, the Sombra Antitribu, who effectively betrayed them and stayed with the Camarilla. During the Victorian Age, the powers of the church began to wane, and of course the powers that had connection with them. While many clans abandoned the church, the Sombra have stayed with them. So even to this modern era, the Sombra have deep connections with the Catholic Church. Now, during this time, of course, they changed the roads to the path of enlightenment, changing something away from humanity, becoming new paths different than humanity. There were many Sabbat revolutions, though, that occurred during this time, which the Sombra were forced to get involved with to keep control of it. There were many restructurings of the Sabbat that occurred in order to help maintain their control of that organization. With the modern knights, Of course, they have changed with the times. No longer do they just grab from the nobility, the merchants, the priests, the cream of the crop, so to say. They now do embrace from all walks of life. They've moved away from the political and religious sides to more financing during this time. Financing has become critical to them. So, of course, they're the ones that bankroll the Sabbat. Any kind of major actions done by them are paid for by Lasombra. Of course, they still hate the Sombra Antitribu and try to hunt them down to the last. The Antitribu numbers are indeed dwindling. But unfortunately for the Lasombra, the main clan, those that remained are the wiliest and oldest, the most powerfulest, the easiest to avoid them. Most embarrassing in these modern times was the defection of Glan Galazzano Visconti. He defected away from the Sabbat to the Camarilla. He destroyed an important memorabilia of... He was one of the founders, one of the signers of this important documentation that basically helped cement the rules of being a Sabbat. He destroyed that document, and he burned his sect, killing all of them, declaring himself the Prince of Milan, and effectively now is under the protection of the Camarilla. So he is even more hated than any other, but he is in a position that they cannot strike directly against this enemy that is very powerful. Now, Lasombra seek power and authority. They don't rule from the limelight. They rule from the shadows, often manipulating others in order to do their dirty work, to do the jobs they want to get done. They are decent at manipulating mortals to get what they want done. Not as good as the Ventru, but still good. They have this idea of domination, of dominator, where they use any means, physical, mental, supernatural ways, social. They use any means possible to dominate and control what they need. Now, the only sort of organization within Lasombra that is separate from the Sabbat is a group called the Friends of the Night. They're this organization of almost favors in amongst the important members of the Sabbat. Basically this connection between those that are important within the blood. They're driven by necessity and accept Diabre as a necessity. In fact, they try to regulate it to the best of their abilities, so that it is mastered almost. That you can get approval in order to diableize another. Now, they don't believe in a strict hierarchy. They believe that if you have an authoritarian structure, it will lead to rebellion. So therefore, they're not organized in a sort of way. They have factions of like-mindedness, each one still of the Lasombra mind, but each one of them specializing in a sort of different section of that mind, different mindsets. These factions don't truly have an organization and leadership. It is just that I'm like-minded to you in the way I think, and the way I want to act as a Lasombra, within the idealism of a Lasombra. I won't go over all these factions, but if you wish to be a member of them, you can look them up yourself, Lasombra factions. Think of them as subcultures of the clan. Now let's talk about the variations of Lasombra. Let us start with the Angelus Alter, a strange mixture of both Bali and Lasombra. An interesting way of thinking about it. They get the disciplines of Daimonismen, dominate, and then either potence, presence, or obtenebration for a third. Now they have the Lasombra weakness, and they originated in the Middle Ages when a Bali attempted to corrupt a number of the Lasombra that were deep into the church. They've survived into modern days, and now they believe that vampires are the instruments of Satan. They're Satanists, similar to the Bali. Now in this modern day, they become addicted to and have a need almost to use obtenebration. They in fact can become almost demon-like. To do so, some of them even join with the Inquisition against the various other devil worshippers, seeing that if they turn against these others to become the one true worshippers, that they gain their demonship. The Qualiant al-khayal is unique for one of the more Islamic-based, Arabian-based vampire groups. For the fact is, they are split between those that still follow the Catholic religion and follow Islam. They are unique that they have this sort of juxtaposition that the two of them oftentimes do have conflicts with each other. They actually are survived into the modern day. Those that focus more on the Islam, though, tend to keep to themselves and be independent, while those with the more Christian tendencies tend to have communications with the Sabbat and those Lasombra. The Lasombra Antitribu are those Lasombra that have effectively joined with the Camarilla. If you would ask members of the Sabbat Lasombra, they would say there are no traitors, there are no anti-tribu. They deny this, and those that are in the Camarilla just say that they are Lasombra. There's in fact this strange idiosyncrasy between the two of them, that they almost deny each other's existence, while still simultaneously hating and wishing to kill each other. Now, a Lasombra that is in this position seeks authority and power. They always manage to ink themselves into this. This isn't to say that Lasombra that are originally from the Sabbat, even nowadays, choose not to leave them. It's just many of them go independent. They decide just to go off on their own. Fewer still join the Camarilla. So still, Lasombra traitors do join them. Now those that do join with the Camarilla, they see them as the winning side of the jihad, the war between the sides of vampires. They see them as the side that's going to come out of top, and that's why they have joined with them. They have this kind of disdain for the rabble of the Sabbat, and the way that they do things that is bar none, just this hatred of them. They also have this kind of authoritarian rule. If you should be working for a Sabbat anti-tribu, and you fail them, you're probably as good as dead. They have no need for failure underneath them. Now there's also this level of mistrust. The Lasombra are the core of the Sabbat. So why would not they be mistrusted? Are they truly on our side? But they prove it with their actions. None hate the Sabbat more than a Lasombra anti-tribu. None seek to destroy them more than these. Now Montaro, the eldest, 4th generation, the eldest of Lasombra, the antediluvians Childai, he was the one that brought many of the remaining elders after the Anarch Revolt to the Camarilla, to protection. So he is the founder of that group. Now, as I've said, Lasombra are highly predatory, and they find themselves always seeking positions of power. This puts them at odds with the Ventru. The two of them have often had parallels in the ways they have done things. Camarilla and the Sabbat. Various other parallels that have existed throughout them that have put them constantly at odds with each other. That they are the most hated of enemies out of any of the two clans. Specifically, this entire battle between the Camarilla and Sabbat is boiled down to the battle between the Ventru and Lasombra. Now they also pride themselves on their elegance and style, on the way they present themselves to the world. This does not mean they all dress alike. They all have their own versions of this style, but they always keep it with that elegant feel. They're also masters of the virtue, the gift of exposition. They know how to describe their style, to talk about it, to talk about the various things, to give these long-winded stories. But don't go for shock, unless you can pull it off. Shock is disliked. Now both the Mediterranean Sea and the Church have had lasting impressions on Lasombra. As I've said before, the Lasombra have an obsession with the sea that cannot be understood. Elders make their homes at the sea. Many of them have history as pirates. This entire concept draws back from the antediluvian Lasombra himself, and no one knows exactly why, but it is this ingrained ability into them. The Church has the same sort of ingraining effect on them. Religion is an important matter. The idea of confession, not penitence, but confession is heavy amongst many members of the Lasombra. Now, the Lasombra's lack of visage can cause some problems with them. It is important that they not obsess over it. This is actually something that they're all affected by, the fact they cannot see themselves. Yet, they are not allowed within the society to show off that they're being affected by it. They have to keep it down. This does mean that sitting for the occasional portrait every couple of years is accepted. More than that, perhaps making a Zimiche, flesh-crafted ghoul to look in their image. That's not called for. So the Sombra Embrace is the most sadistic of them all. They find someone that is very strong-willed, that has this power to lead others. And then they test them. They destroy their lives. They destroy this person's lives down to nothingness, that they just find doom. And they see if they can pick themselves up. If they just fail and go into depression, then they're failures. But if they manage to begin to raise themselves up, to find them, claw their way back out, they test them again. And continue doing this for some time until they find themselves truly worthy of being embraced. That is when they finally bring them into the night. Lasombra rarely do any of the mass embraces that the Sabbat is known for. The other clans in their group can do that. Now, the Sabbat have an interesting relation with ghouls. They despise them. They see them as weak and without willpower. The fact that they use fortitude and potence, and they have no wills, and that they are mortals in a vampire society. They just look down at them. Lasombra ghouls are often sniveling and fearful, always fearing that they're going to do something that will cause their master to strike them down. Now, Lasombra ghouls come in two forms. The first is the accountants, the lawyers, the bankers, the financiers of Lasombra. These have the best position out of the two types of ghouls under Lasombra. For as long as they continue to make money, they're not in any trouble. They're in a position where as they continue to do their jobs correctly, they're fine. The other group are not so lucky. They're the ones that, because of this idea of no longer seeing their face, many of the Lasombra like having personal attendants to groom them, to comb their hair, to put up makeup on them, to clean them, to do this various works. And the thing is, they are very strict. 100 strokes to the hair. Perfection is needed. If you should miss but one stroke, you don't know when a potence enhanced hit with a brush might come down upon you as a servant. The anger of Lasombra could easily turn on you. And the fact is, there are those that are either scarred for their faces, put in all the same way, or are forced to wear masks. Because if you certainly can't see your face, why do you have to see theirs? Now, the only major difference between the editions of Lasombra is back in 2nd edition. When they were first introduced, they had an entirely different clan symbol. So that's it for today. I introduced you to Lasombra, the leaders of the Sabbat. Now, they aren't a united front. Some of them have, of course, many powerful elders, have joined with the Camarilla, because they see that as the winning side in this war. But no matter where they are, they seek power. Power to rule from the shadows, from the sidelines, to manipulate others into doing what they want. They are a ruling clan, and they believe in it. They live by it. So if any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It should support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.